Hello, Mr. Flanagan. This is Vasily Michele presenting his Manor project. Now, my project, I worked on it for a week, as I said, and we'll just be starting off. So, as you can see, this is my map, and then as we should be zooming in, this is my manor. Now, manors had lord and ladies that would live in it. A manor was a cultural farm estate, and they were usually used as homes for gathering places for the wealthy, although sometimes the villagers living next to the manor were invited. Manors were usually surrounded by woods, orchards, gardens, lakes, or ponds where the fish could be found. They were also usually surrounded by fortified walls, and sooner or later became more of a defensive war-type house with walls and guards in them. Uh, yeah. Manors varied in sizes and usually were surrounded by a village with peasants, a blacksmith, a mill, a bakery, and other things that all worked for the manor. Now, as we were visiting this house, we can see that we have the kitchen, the farm place, and the zombies, which are the serfs working for the lord, that we shall see in a long time. Now, this would be like more of a reading place or a study place for the lord in case they ever wanted anything. Now, as we would move on to the bedroom, we could see that there was a broken glass and stuff, as if maybe the Lord and was not happy. The bedroom, and this was the Lord. Now, with the loss of or without having the people in this game, except the character that you control, you could only have so many options. So that's what I went with. So a lord would, like I said before, a lord would be a lord or lady, usually married, maybe with children, that would live in a big house and who had knights, peasants, and everyone working for them. Peasants would pay knights for taxes, and the knights would use a share of that money that they collected from the peasants, giving, and they would pay the lord. The lord would then pay all those taxes to the king, and now as you can see right now we were visiting the peasant/serfs' homes. So the largest amount of land on the medieval manors would be used by the villagers. Their houses would be surrounded by a yard called a troft and a garden named the croft, terms used in medieval times. This land would usually be growing vegetables, a percentage of which would be given to the knight as payment for their land. Villager houses were usually one room, and the family shared a space with the animals or with the animals that they took care of, though in this area we didn't have any maps. Now, as you could see, all the zombies represented the serfs, and I suggest you to pause the video at any time and maybe look around the room and then wind back at what I'm doing. Now, as you can see right now, I was going over a part that wasn't obligatory at all. It was the dock storage that I created for personal reasons. Those and the zombie could maybe be the person who would manage the boats, and the people would go see him in case they wanted to drive down or go anywhere through the river. So what we were visiting right here are the fields. Fields were usually used to cultivate wheat and other things depending on the season. The crops that were cultivated were usually shared between the farmers and the lord. They would be shared for taxes. Usually farm animals would be kept at these farmlands. As we could see right here on the left, we have the llamas, which are livestock. Livestock and crops were usually cultivated by peasants that worked for the manor. They would usually keep a part of what they cultivated for themselves, but most of it went to the lord. In autumn, people planted wheat, barley, or rye. In spring, people planted oats, barley, and legume, and they were planted to usually be cultivated in the summer. With the absence of animals in this game, we could see that I used the llamas as animals. Now, as we will be moving on, we will be observing another peasant/serf home. They were usually simple, like I said, with one bed and little bathtubs or something. As we can see, there was a elevation problem, as we could say maybe a glitch that would maybe cause. As we keep on going, we're going to this house, which is another house that was situated next to the church, which we can see on the left. Here I went outside of the map for a second, and everything was readjusted. Now as we go into the interior of this house, we can see that it is very simplistic, like all the other peasant and serf houses, though this one having a much more of a complex, I think, storage design with ale tubes, as we could call them. As you can see here, there were also beds, tables, and buckets to people would probably use to drink or clean them off. And up there would be the storage room, maybe. And as we could see, I showed you the foundation at the bottom. Now this is the last house. This one is much more impressive compared to the other houses. This maybe could be a friend of the Lord's more than, or maybe a night house. As you can see, it was situated with one room, one bed, a storage area, but with a beautiful balcony that had a view on the land. As we see it, it was also very founded. It had a tree, two parts to it. It had a view on the woodlands, the mill, the bakery, the blacksmith, and even the manor in the back, if I'm not to be mistaken. Yep. If they would, as they would come out, they would see the manor. This would be the underground foundation of it. Now, as we will be moving on, we will be going to the drawbridge. Now, drawbridges were stimulated usually around the manor to make sure that no one could get in without the Lord's permission, but they could also usually be situated to give villagers across the rivers or the water landscapes especially when the manor was in altitude and it usually did not have a river with it or any land or moats around it. Now, if the manor was in altitude and only had one way in, the manor would usually not be surrounded by water and could be situated by and could have a river instead further down that could have maybe a piece of land. There was a river that could be stretched down for a few kilometers. Now, moats were usually surrounded across with the manor, but not always. They could also usually be not at the manor itself, and they could be, sometimes they wouldn't be, say, here or across the manor. Usually this would happen when the manor was in altitude at high levels, and it could not have a moat around it, and I couldn't really create a moat due to the fact that it is practically impossible to change the way the map is already situated. You can only add on to it. Now, as you can see, we've been visiting for the past few minutes while I've been talking about the drawbridges and moats. The castle. Now, as I was dancing, I was praising the chicken god, which is what I guess was a lord you could pay. Now, the church was another central feature of the medieval manor. The Roman Catholic, most of the religion in Europe was the Roman Catholic, and it was a law that people went to church on Sunday. The local priests, however, inside the church were much poorer and often uneducated. It was the priest's job to look after the sick villages as they were preaching in the church. The church also had a tendency to ask for something in return for God's help. It was usually used for the priest's purposes and his living. As we continue, we are actually visiting the mill in this. Now, the mills were used to provide power to grind grain into the principle of processed food, flour, which fed society until the modern times. And as populations grew, simple-handed mills were unable to keep up with the demand for flour, and some people made changes to the way the mill works so that it could be more efficient and not usually be forced to have a man. Now, as we are coming here, we can see that we are visiting the blacksmith. Now, in each village there was only one blacksmith. There was only one medieval blacksmith in every village. He was responsible for making all the required weapons, a variety of weapons which would be uh, swords, daggers, or even he would also make doornails, or locks, keys, knives, horseshoes, armors, arrowheads, axes, spears, and much more, depending on the demand of the soldiers slash knights. As you can see here, as we're visiting, there are a lot of armor and a lot of weapons. And as we go into this room, this could be maybe where he worked on a table, focusing on making the whatever he was crafting better. Now, as we move on, we will take one last look at the blacksmith. Now, as we will be moving on to the bakery. Now, a baker was the person that made bread. He was very important to the village. He provided food for the whole village, but mainly for the lord and king. As a baker, you had to go to the mill every morning to get your grain ground to make flour, which was used to make your bread. Kids, children, and adults came to talk about how their life was going and came to reunite with people, usually coming into coming to the bakery. Now, as we look at this, no comment on what this is. It just says Alonso and the fish head. Now, this could be maybe a storage, and that the table part that was at the top of that could maybe be the VIP area, or the baker's family, or any like special guests that he had, or that guests that came over every day. Now, now we'll be visiting the woodlands. Now, the woodlands were quite an interesting thing in the churches. So, woodlands were pieces of land that had wood on them, and growing forests. They were usually used for wood to heat during winter, and they used the wood to build. Now, as we could see, inside the wood we have a lot of fallen branches, as we will be running through the woodland, or the forest. Now, on the side of it, if you had seen before, there was quite a stacking of wood lengths. Now, this usually wasn't the way that people back then cultivated wood. Usually they would have more like stacked logs instead of like more modern society logs like that, and those logs would usually be used to heat the forest, in order to, or heat houses during winter, especially in high altitudes where it would become cold. Now, as we are looking right now, we can see that we are admiring the knights. So, knights were fighters slash warriors, but also high-class men who knew how to paint, create music. They learned how to read and write, but also knew how to fight. They would work for the lord and collect taxes from the villagers in order to pay the lord. The lord and lady, which we saw, were the nobles who collected all the taxes. They created the rules, they collected all the money, and gave permissions to the peasants to leave their land or force them to stay on their land. Now, as we could, now as we will have back while we will be visiting the rest of the knights, and we will be visiting the map. Drawbridges and moats, we will be jumping back to that. Moats moats could be present in most manors, though some mountains tended to not have one, as an example in my project. In addition to the restriction of the map, like I said before, it was kinda impossible to make a moat around what I created, if it was to make the project realistic. As we are looking over at the map, we can see all the different additions, all the livestock, the crops. And now we will be visiting the final parts of my presentation, which would be the roads. Now, there were different type of roads. Roads were usually built in 3 layers: large stone, a mixture of road material, and a layer of gravel. 2 other Scottish engineers, Thomas Telford and John Loudon McAdam, are credited for the first modern roads. They also designed the system of raising the foundation of the road in the center for easy water drainage. But as we can see the roads there, the roads are made of dirt. And as we can see the river currently, as we're focusing on the river, we can see that it was not very deep. Now, there was um, the feudal system, which was what separated all the different classes, had the lords working at being the most important job inside or during the medieval times, or the king being the top, then the lords, who were usually friends with the king, then the knights, who would usually work, they would always work for the lord in a certain area, and they would work in different areas. They usually had probably the best life because they were free. They were free to do what they want. They didn't have to pay their taxes with their own money. They would just take a part of what they collected and pay the the lord, and they usually could be free, wander around, and do whatever they pleased. Now, on the bottom, we had the serfs and the peasants. They were the people who worked for the lord. Peasants were people who stayed on the land, but helped out with the thing, but with the lord and managing all the crops. Yet, they were usually allowed to leave with the permission of the lord. Whereas serfs were people who pledged their allegiance to the lord in order to have protection from incoming Germanic tribes or other tribes or even upcoming armies. They would pledge allegiance to the lord, and and they would help the lord with whatever he needed, and in return for that, the lord would give them protection in his land. Now, the crop rotation, or the crops, as we saw, were the three-field system, or they were called the three-field system, and they had a different purpose in each season, and they grew different things depending on each season, as, like I said, wheat, barley, rye, and much more. Now, most manors were self-sufficient with enough food growing on the land where they didn't really need to trade. They had bakers who would work with the wheat that was collected and turn it into flour in the mill. They had a blacksmith, which would provide armor and weapons. They had people working on every side. They would have maybe builders and other less important jobs than the three that were stated. Now, they even had knights protecting the land, a few, maybe sometimes 10, 15, roaming around, protecting, but also keeping sure that all the rules were being followed with the serfs and the peasants, that they were following the rules, and that they were never misbehaving or not listening to what the manor or the lord had to say. Now, before I end off this presentation on my thing, sorry for this video for being extremely long, 18 minutes. I forgot to mention a few things. Now, in the church, that thing that the priest would ask for in return for gifts, for God's gift, or God's for a return, what God would do, or what the priest would do, was they would ask for a trethy, a teeth. The definition of that is actually 1/10 of an annual produce of earnings, formerly taken as a tax for the support of the church and the clergy. Now, the priest would usually ask for this, and this is what the priest made his living off, would be the small donations from the people that would give the donations to the church in order for being blessed by God. Now, something I forgot to say, the fields or the flat land that I had is what we call an arable piece of land. It's a piece of land that is used or suitable for growing crops. Now, especially the part where my manor is situated, and where the second piece of crops with the livestock is situated, that is where there is a tendency of we can see that the land is very arable and very situated for growing crops. Whereas if we had to put the crops on a downslide, that wouldn't be arable land due to the land not being of good quality or of good suitable quality for the growing land. Now, the last thing we now in conclusion, I think to my entire presentation, I spent pretty much a lot of time on this. I tended to I worked on this. I didn't really have any help except maybe suggestions from my brother, who was interested in my project, and I taught him while working about the past and how medieval times worked.